Hey there, Squirrel Army. Today we are discussing why we discuss bad cards. If you're enjoying the content here, you can join the Squirrel Army by subscribing. Okay, so this is a weird thing that happens when you do content on YouTube that you have to discuss bad cards. And the reason that sort of comes about is to help newer and younger and less experienced and less knowledgeable players to understand why these cards are not worth the time in playing. And that's the point. It's not like every single card is the worst card ever. There are some cards that are perhaps just not quite as good as some other cards and whatnot, like saying, you know, Cultivate and Kadama's Reach. They aren't terrible cards, but they're not quite as good as Nature's Law or Three Visits or whatever else. So that's where you start saying, well, what defines talking about bad cards or not worth running cards, perhaps? But, the thing is, that's the main thing about talking about bad cards or cards that aren't quite as good as what people sometimes think they are. They might be still staples in the format or whatever sometimes. And sometimes you've got to challenge that, traditional wisdom or whatever that's sort of been around some of these cards because, hey, they're still seeing play or whatnot. Like Temple of the False God, and things like that. But still, there are cards that are out there that you go, wow, this is such a bad card. Why are people playing it and whatnot? But yet, some people will reason to say, hey, well, I think it's pretty good in this deck. But that's the point sometimes. In certain decks and in certain strategies, hey, that card's actually pretty darn decent. But why do we talk about actually actively bad cards, the cards that, realistically no one should really be playing and whatnot, cards that are a net negative to themselves and a net negative overall, unless there's an obvious strategy that's taking advantage of those net negatives. Well, again, it's to help people avoid those pitfalls, those traps, those things that you just fall into when you sort of have just gotten into this game, getting into this format or any other format. Again, if you start looking at modern guides and modern metagames and whatever, pioneer metagames or whatever, they will have to go through these sorts of things as well. In EDH, again, you can still say, well, I want to play a janky deck. I want to play a fun deck. I want to make this bad card work or whatever. Okay, cool. You go have fun with that and maybe even we'll play a game here or there or whatever. But just knowing, hey, by the way, this is a bad card. Oh, okay, cool. It's a bad card. Well, I want to make this bad card work. At least you've got that knowledge then of saying, well, this is a bad card, but I find it funny or I find it interesting or whatever. Or, hey, it might be so bad that I want to take that challenge of being like, no one's been able to figure this thing out, so I'm going to try to figure it out or whatever. That sort of thing. So that's fine if people want to do that or whatever. You can do whatever you want for the most part in this format. That's the great thing about this format. As I say, even if you're playing bad cards, you're not playing the wrong way. I think some people's perspective on, playing good cards equals good deck, etc., or just whatever the way that the game is meant to be played is meant to be played at, maximum velocity and whatnot and all of this. No, it doesn't have to be, not everyone has to play at CDH levels. Not everyone has to, again, not play at, optimal levels. Not everyone has to play at, suboptimal levels either for those people who are, saying, well, I don't want to play that way. Well, you don't have to if you don't want to, but that's your choice again. Saying, well, that doesn't interest me. Saying a game that doesn't have interaction doesn't interest me. And it doesn't interest me either to a degree because I always have that problem of being like, what am I going to do if I am not able to kill things? and whatnot. So you do need removal. It's one of those things that I do believe in and whatnot. But you know, it's one of those things about saying, well, I've brought this up in how much removal should I run, video that I did a while back, that it starts becoming like, dude, I'm not running 500 spells that just kill a thing or whatever, or just bad spells that don't really do anything, or just bad sorcery speed removal or whatever. I wouldn't run lightning bolt or something like that. Not very good, like just not nearly good enough. So it's just one of those things. It's like, well, where is the line of saying, well, how much removal should I run, or whatever, or how many cards does a good deck make, like whatever, or how many good cards does a deck make of whatever, like, is this a actually actively good deck, or is this like like one of those things, it's one of those oxymoron things. How much would a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood, like, it's a bit weird when you actually think about how these decks work. There's not a lot of synergy sometimes, and yet they're still really good. So it's more about card quality than synergy or whatnot. But I always want to build for synergy. I always want to build for a strategy. And again, everyone's a bit different, but again, that doesn't make. And again, you could say the opposite, like I was sort of saying, how many good cards does a good deck make, or whatever, or how many cards do I need to put into a deck to make it actually good, or whatever. What constitutes good in somebody else's mind is still bad. Like, oh wow, you're not playing a 9.5. Oh, it's bad. Whatever, whatever it is. Like, oh, you're not playing a 6. Oh man, it's bad, or whatever. Whatever. But again, how many bad cards does it take to make a bad deck? Or whatever. So again, it's just one of those things about, if you showed somebody a 6, like a power 6 deck or whatever, which I never sort them by numbers, but I will use that frame of reference for now because this is important to this this part of the conversation, is again getting back to that power level discussion that I sort of was talking about, is that, hey, it's one of those issues that if you showed someone a power 6 deck or whatever, or a power 4 deck, like, how do you know that that's a power 4 deck? I could show you this power 6 deck, and would you know that it's a power 6 deck? Just by looking at it, just by looking at the cards that are therein, or whatever? I would find it very difficult, and I think a lot of people would find it very difficult to actually identify, oh yeah, this is a 6 and this is a 4 or whatever, or this is a 5 and this is a 6 or whatever. Like, where does the difference lie? Like, obviously, when you're talking about regular Commander and CDH Commander, there's an obvious difference there, but when you're actually talking about the more minute differences, it's harder to tell. And then again, like, if you say this is a modified precon, well, does that mean it's any better than the precon? Well, not really. It's just more synergistic to the plan of that precon. It just doesn't have all of the other stuff that was in that precon that was like, do all this random other stuff that the deck isn't really doing. So again, like, the deck is better in terms of synergy. It might not be more powerful. So there's all these little things that go into, whether you're talking about bad cards or a bad deck. And that, like, bad deck is different from bad cards. I get that. And I've kind of been using those intertwinedly. But that is sort of what happens when you put bad cards into a pile. Like, if you're putting together a deck and you put bad cards into that deck, well, suddenly you've got a bad deck or whatever, in theory at least. So yeah, or running bad cards leads to being a worse or less powerful, let's say, deck. Less powerful cards lead to being a less powerful deck. That's just the facts. But there's nothing wrong with having a less powerful deck. There's nothing wrong with having a precon deck. There's nothing wrong with having whatever, Chair's Tribal, which is basically a 0 power deck, or 1 or a 2, or whatever it is. A deck that basically doesn't really do anything, doesn't have answers, if that's what you want to play. And letting people do that and say, hey, well, I don't have a deck that's on that power level. May I borrow a deck that's on that power level? Maybe I won't have as much fun as what I normally would have, but hey, I'm playing a game, and that's sort of like the most fun part of it, in a way, is to being like, also a lot of that fun comes from going, wow, I wonder what I could do with this if I was given, like $50 challenge or whatever. Okay, let's build a commander deck with, a very small budget, like, or even less, $10 or less, or all commons or whatever, like poor for commander or whatever. You've got to build a deck, okay, and we've got basically no money to build it. Okay, like, how can we do that? And, whatnot. So, and how can we keep it to the power level that, everyone else is on, and whatnot? Because that's what you're always thinking, or what you've always got to be thinking, rather than, is this a good card? Is this a bad card? Is this a good deck? Is this, powerful deck? In a way, is like, is this suited for the power level of my opponents? And if you, like, are thinking what your opponents are doing or what power level they're at, you will suddenly go, oh, wow, actually, no, this definitely isn't, and they definitely weren't doing that, or whatever. They definitely weren't doing what I think they were doing, and they were way off of doing anything of any significance. But anyway, that's the way it goes sometimes. But anyway, yeah, that's what I sort of think about, like, what makes the reasons why we sort of have to talk about bad cards and bad decks and whatnot is to inform people mostly, and to, get that conversation going as well between players of saying, hey, well, it's okay for me to be playing, what's wrong with me playing, a bad deck or a bad card or whatever. This is my deck, and this is the way I want to play. Like, if people are pressuring you or trying to tell you that you have to play one way or another, or your deck has to be this, or your deck has to be that, don't listen to them. Like, I offer advice on this channel as far as upgrading decks or whatever. How can I make this deck better? But those are just suggestions, or whatever. People can choose to do what they want with that information. These are just my suggestions. These are just my thoughts. Hey, what do you want to do? Okay, you want to build a janky bad deck. Okay, cool. Right, well, how do we do that? How much money do we have? What kind of cards do we have? What colors are we in, etc. Working it out. What strategy is it, if any? Are we at that level? So, yeah. That is that. You guys can let me know what you guys think, because there's all kinds of different people out there, and everyone has a different perspective on the game and whatnot, depending where you play and how you play and all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, it's definitely interesting to hear all the sorts of different thoughts that are out there, and some people, conflict, and like, that's one of those things that a lot of people have to work on. As well, of being able to go, yeah, and you know what? I'm cool with that. I don't have to, tell this person what to do and how they should play or whatever. I will just leave it alone and, let them play the way they want to play, because that's the way that they want to play. So it's none of my business to really tell them, what to do and how to do and blah, blah, blah. Unless they want to upgrade a deck and say, hey, I actually want to play, a 9.5 or a whatever, then, okay, let's go, buddy. Let's build this, powerful deck or whatever it is. Or let's build a more powerful deck than what you've got. Where are we going? How powerful do we want? Blah, 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 etc. So those are those things. But anyway, guys, as I said, hope to see you in the next one.